Okay, thank you for coming, everyone, in this very terrible weather. Today's panel's discussion is called Reconstructing Mother Tongues. Basically, we're going to be very casual. We're going to share some experience of our Malaysian artist, Okui Lala, and then, of course, our local Hong Kong artists on their view on mother tongues, as that becomes a very hot topic in the past couple of months. We still have one more speaker coming. She is coming in late because of the weather, but we're going to start first. So I'll introduce again our Malaysian artist, Okui Lala. She has a work outside. Chinese Whispers, yes. And then Tang Kwok-hin's local Hong Kong artist, the child of the installation right outside. So we'll start from Okui.
Hello. Maybe a bit introduction of the situation in Malaysia. And also my background. So I went to a Chinese school. There's different types of public school in Malaysia. One is 国民型中学, 国民学校. So one is national school, another one is national type school. So it means for the national type school, it actually means Mandarin school and also vernacular school. Sorry. So we have Mandarin school and also Tamil school as a national school, meaning that we are using the same syllabus, but the language of communication in the school, like the school rules or 周会, school assembly, is used in Mandarin, for example, or Tamil, for example. So I went to a Chinese school in Malaysia for my primary and secondary education there. And then I went to a semi-public university in Kuala Lumpur. So when I went to the Chinese school, our language is in Mandarin, but we were forbidden to speak in dialects. So the dialects in Malaysia, we have Hokkien, Teochew, Hakka, Cantonese, and a lot others. So it's a bit more complex because the Chinese migration that came to Malaysia in the late 19th century and early 20th century comes from different parts of China. So due to the 1980s movement, there was a movement that is called 少说方言多说中文. So meaning that don't speak less dialect, speak Mandarin more. So it influenced generation like me that we were forbidden to speak Mandarin dialect in school, but to speak Mandarin more. So because of this, when the idea of mother tongue to me is a bit complex, because my mother tongue actually is Mandarin. I speak Mandarin with my mom, and with my dad I speak Hokkien, although in the video it's Teochew. It's a bit similar, Teochew and Hokkien.
Same family.
Same family.
Yes.
We're trying to be very careful because language is very particular. But because in Penang, the majority speak Hokkien. So it somehow end up I speak Hokkien with my dad. But I could understand a bit of Teochew, which is shown in the video. But I speak Mandarin with my mom. So I checked with my mom this morning. I asked her, why do you speak Mandarin with me? And she said, because I have a sister, where my sister is older than me by 9 years old. So my sister, in the family, my sister will speak Mandarin to me. So my mom also speak Mandarin to me. So it end up, my mother tongue become Chinese, Mandarin. I think it's quite common in some of the family because the mother or the parents wanted the kids to speak well in certain language, for example, English or Mandarin. So the parents might choose that language to communicate with the children. So for me, when I was looking at the title of our talk today, mother tongue, it's actually my father tongue there. And I think the idea of mother tongue is very interesting because Teochew is my family language. I have several sentiments towards it. when I hear the language, because it's something that was spoken in my family, especially my father's side. But it's not my first tongue in this sense, because my first tongue is in Mandarin. And I think, did I make, we all lost it, I think, because it was slightly complicated here. So for me, I think, especially when I was looking back at my language proficiency, I wonder why I cannot speak certain, I wonder why I can't speak a dialect well, for example, Teochew or Hokkien. So I look back at the education system, and also my work evolved around the education background, and also, yeah, so, hello. So yeah, I was looking back at the education background. Therefore, I found out in the 80s, there was this, 80s or 70s, there was this campaign to speak more Mandarin in school. Yeah, so.
Well, it's actually
a very long introduction.
It's actually laid out in one of the books smashed by Wang Guoxin's Malaysia. It's actually laid out the new prime minister has actually laid out this in his book in the 70s to drive Malaysia toward a Mandarin-speaking country to be similar to Singapore. Singapore also has the same not the same problem, the same sort of solutions that they want to drive their countrymen toward a more Mandarin-speaking country rather than a so-called dialect. I'm hesitant to use the word dialect here. I didn't use any of that word. But anyway, can we talk about I'm personally interested in something. How does Penang and KL difference in terms of Chinese speaking communities?
Chinese speaking in
KL and
which
Penang.
context? I mean, in the society, or
in the society? Like I went to KL and they all speak Cantonese, right? And Penang is the reverse. It's all Hokkien or Chiu. So how does that work in one country?
I think it's due to, so for the larger Chinese community in Malaysia are mostly saturated in straight settlement place like Penang, Malacca, and later on when the British occupation, it was focused on Ipoh and Kuala Lumpur due to the tin mining. So there was different wave of migration coming in, therefore different parts coming from different parts. So for Penang, actually we do have a number of Cantonese speakers in the inner city of Georgetown, but maybe due to the population of Hokkien is more, so Hokkien is spoken more. And I think it's also due to the background of business in KL. Perhaps certain business was the main business, bigger business in Cantonese. So, and the Cantonese speaker is more. So there's a lot of Cantonese speaker, especially in Kuala Lumpur and Ipoh. And Penang, yeah, because it's slightly north, so it's more on Hokkien. Yeah. But in school, still within, as in the school level, for all in Malaysia, we didn't teach in dialect. Yeah.
So we can move on to Tang Kwok-hin's little bit of introduction of himself and what he thinks about what mother tongue is.
Actually, I'm not. Yeah, I haven't done a lot of research about mother tongue. Just more about my experience, maybe. I live in a rural village in Hong Kong. Actually, I totally don't know the Wai Tao Wa, the village language. I totally don't know. Wai Tao Wa is kind of.
Wai Tao is a mash of Hakka and Bo On Dongguan Wa. So it's a mash of many
I
things.
guess my grandpa can speak fluently, but my father or my mom, they don't really, they know a bit. And to my generation, I totally don't know.
You should talk about how long has your family been in Hong Kong first, though?
400 to 500 years, maybe, based in Hong Kong. Yeah. maybe from
100.
Song Dynasty.
Oh.
Yeah. Or
So I'm the
100.
fourth generation in Malaysia.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I really don't know because it is just kind of more like spoken language. I always think that maybe Cantonese or something like that, but it's not exactly. While you just speak through your mouth, you don't have kind of your written format. Maybe it will gradually change or disappear or somehow. Maybe I don't know. And maybe from what my experience to mother tongue, maybe some situation like that. Maybe while some friends, some art events. Some friends internationally see together, if just some Hong Kong people, we are mainly Cantonese, right?
Yeah.
But suddenly maybe from the mainland China people come, maybe Mandarin, suddenly the tongue came to Mandarin. And then maybe one more, mother tongue is English maybe, or someone only know English, then suddenly the whole situation changed to English. It's more like, it's actually some hierarchy in science maybe. There's somehow you just cannot reject and you just follow the atmosphere to do something like that. And I don't know how if we talk about the current situation in Hong Kong, the education itself is more Mandarin lesson nowadays, and then even the relationship with China. I don't know how this go maybe 2047. While Hong Kong totally returned to China, I don't know. If you want me to say something about the mother tongue, the language itself, it always changes. Just like the political situation, the keywords, how the government use, it changed a lot actually. And in more old times, maybe the words assassination still exists, but now all are murder. There's no assassination no more. It's just any kill is murder.
Is that in Cantonese?
No, I mean in the context itself. Yeah, in Hong Kong maybe you seldom hear about this word sat. More like sat, just sat. Yeah, because it more something against to the authority. Because sat this word. Or different.
Murder.
Yeah.
One is underground, like
Underground, and it is more legally.
Assassin is
I don't know. It's not legally. I mean, this word is more how to say.
It's more subversive.
Yeah.
Definitely.
The situation is like this. The words actually, even Cantonese itself, it changed a lot. I mean, the keywords we use, the government or the family. Cantonese now is more family language or friends language nowadays. But in some so-called popular situation, we normally use English or normally English actually. Yeah. And in some more, if you have some exchange situation with mainland China, more Mandarin. Cantonese is more friendly, intimate language to me nowadays. Yeah. For me, mother tongue sometimes.
So the first speaker, Louise, she's the editor for your magazine Literature. What's it?
I'm from Hong Kong Literary Magazine. Yeah, I'm from Hong Kong Literary Magazine called Fleurs, which is a French name. So in English, it's Flower of Letters. And I'm a writer, I'm a poet myself, so I write poems and recently published an anthology of my own works. And speaking of mother tongue, of course, is Cantonese, and my parents are both from Shaotao from China. So my grandpa, they both speak Shaotao. And then, but I do not know. I only know how to count numbers and really like basic, very basic sentence or basic words like some food or something like that. So actually, I really know nothing about Shaotao language. So I'll say, like, of course, my mother tongue is Cantonese, and actually, it has deeply affect writings, my own writings, and also writings of many Hong Kong writers. because somehow, even though in written language is more or less the same, it's like we share the same sort of written language with Chinese authors. But when you look into the syntax and the word orders, actually our written Chinese language is heavily influenced by our mother tongue, our spoken language. So in this case, Hong Kong written language, we can say that is actually a very special kind of Hong Kong written language there in Hong Kong literature. And so that's why for our magazine, I think in 2014, we have an issue which is about Cantonese writing. So can Cantonese really be a literary language? Can it provide or sort of brings out good literary work? Actually, it is, because back in the 60s or 70s, there are quite a number of popular writers who write in Cantonese in Hong Kong newspapers in columns. So actually, it forms a special volume of work that is in Hong Kong literature. Even nowadays, the KOL online, they write Cantonese, right? Even like for Apple Daily, they write in Cantonese most of the time. So actually, it is a very it's actually rooted in Hong Kong culture, and we cannot neglect this fact easily. But the problem nowadays in Hong Kong is that the education is really a problem, because like for the younger generations in the kindergarten or the primary school, they are starting to use Mandarin as the medium of instruction. So even like maybe Hong Kong is less serious now, but in Guangzhou or some cities in the southern parts of China, people there or the students there actually they speak in Mandarin in school, or the teachers and friends, even though their parents speak in Cantonese. So then when they read a passage in book, they do not know how to read it in Cantonese. They only know how to read it in Mandarin. So this is actually the problem. In fact, for government, it's very easy for them to kill a language, honestly. It's by generations of education. They just try to force another language in school. In school is quite enough. So that's what I fear is that in our next generation, maybe we have to speak in Mandarin with our kids. That's actually the most horrible thing. Even though they can understand Cantonese, but the fact is they prefer to speak in Mandarin because that's their daily communicative language. So in this sense, when I was invited to this talk, I was thinking how can we sort of fight against this trend, or how can we try to combat with government's education policy. Well, actually, I'm quite pessimistic. Honestly, if they really implement a very forceful education or language policy in Hong Kong, saying that there's a must for all kids in Hong Kong to speak only in Mandarin in Hong Kong, actually we have really we can't really preserve Cantonese in our daily life. Of course, we can preserve Cantonese in terms of culture. We can try to write. We can teach our kids or try to bring out the special things or features in Cantonese. But the fact is, if the speaking community is reducing, it's really it's a very haunting fact that a language can be easily killed and extinct in human culture.
Yeah, that's... Thank you. Thank you for Louise sharing. That's the whole main point of why I want Louise to come here and talk. So,
can I add?
Yeah.
I think one thing interesting is perhaps what's happening to Hong Kong now is what happened to Malaysia 100 years ago. Maybe because in the 1920s, so my Chinese school was originally named as 英省附建女中 Penang Hokkien High School. So, but our language of but we follow because due to the policy we follow the Chinese policy. So we speak Mandarin in the end. In certain research in the late 19th century, certain private school in Penang was taught in dialect, which is Hokkien. But in the 1920s, it changed to Chinese due to the trend in China. Yeah. So.
Yeah, I totally kind of understand it because in Hong Kong the policy of teaching, like official policy teaching in Chinese, is actually didn't start until 70s. So before that, there are pockets of people from various regions in Hong Kong, like various regions in China, who emigrate into Hong Kong, and like Louise' family is from Santao, and then your family is from Chiujiao, and of course Tang Kwok-hin's never moved. But there's I really want to understand, because I do not have another mother tongue, because my family is from Guangzhou, like not Guangzhou but similar. So my family never has another non-Cantonese speaking language in my family. So what I want to know is, do you have a reason why you lost that kind of language skill? Like from her would be like, why? From when did you stop using Santao, or from when did you stop using that original language they have?
I think because I speak 4 to 5 languages.
How many languages do you actually speak?
Mandarin, English, Malay is our national language. Teochew, which is spoken in there, Hokkien. So there's 5. So to me, language is it sounds like wow, but actually it's almost like it's hard to balance between these 5 languages because they have different purpose and sentiments. So I lost the language. I didn't lose the language. It was passed out. My mom talked to me in Mandarin, and it wasn't my first language in Hokkien or Teochew. So yeah, for me it's difficult to balance between these 4 to 5 languages. Yeah. And I also realized due to the education background, so before I was 17 years old, I went to a Chinese school, so my diary was in Mandarin. Then I went to university, which is a semi-public university in Kuala Lumpur. Kuala Lumpur is more, because it's our capital, it's more, it's a capital, so everyone is there, so it's more mixed in terms of race. So my language of communication, and also because it's a city, my language of communication is English. And our university used English as a material. So my diary changed from Mandarin to English. Even if, so the part that was challenging for me, there's certain part of me that speak to myself in English, but mainly I speak to myself in Mandarin. So I did discuss this with some of my Chinese speaking friends, Mandarin speaking friends, and I asked, when do you speak to yourself in English, or when do you speak to yourself in Mandarin, like what language you speak to yourself? And we were also wondering about the definition of mother tongue. So someone joked that mother tongue is the language you curse in, for example. Or the language, another friend said, I think Cantonese.
I have a different definitions.
And what's yours?
The language you dreamed in. Like in the dream, what kind of language you speak?
But my friend also said, but I also cannot recall in what language I dream in.
I speak while dreaming.
And someone said it's maybe the language you count in. Yeah, I don't know.
Yes.
Yeah. So.
Yes. Depends on the subject. So how? Well,
I think that always mother tongue as a tool as your methodology. While you think, you just talk to yourself. You don't really speak something. You just think. While you say to yourself, I use Cantonese most of the time. And then I think that why the village language is kind of declining is more like actually the language itself maybe somehow reflect the life itself. And actually my grandpa generation, they still can talk maybe. I mean to speak the village language, but they still learn Cantonese. Actually they can speak actually. And then they actually use very less, I mean the village language. Actually fulfill the life request maybe. Actually it's not only about to somebody else, not only about dialogue. Actually I guess it's also about the methodology, the works itself, how the works he or she use, and the works maybe there's some village language doesn't include some works maybe, or that include other works maybe. And I think that is more about methodology for me. So why I think that mother tongue is important to me, because there's something very Hong Kong element inside. But yeah, we need to discuss what that.
Actually, I agree a lot with Tang Kwok-hin's idea about language as a methodology, because actually a language preserves a kind of culture and thought process, a special kind of thought process respective to that culture. So sometimes we will see some languages more developed than the other, because in the course of development, the language absorbs different things or different elements from other culture into it. So we can see maybe English is a more vibrant and more rich language, because over the years it has absorbed a lot of things, French or even nowadays even from Chinese also. It has become a very rich language that can express different things, and also like the whole world basically knows how to speak English, and different people from different culture actually adds to the whole English writing volume. And in this sense, it becomes a strong language. So with some other language, like the Norwegian language, because I met a friend just now who lives in Norway. He's from Hong Kong, but he is now based in Norway. And he told me that actually the Norwegian language is a very simple language. So when it says good or nice or superb, basically they use the same words to refer to the same thing, the same feeling. So this is very it's an interesting fact at how language evolves. So when we talk about when Cantonese is dying, or whether we should preserve Cantonese or what, so basically is that if the speaking language or speaking community is diminishing, that means we cannot add or less people or fewer people are adding to the language. So naturally, it is less expressive, or it can cope with less of our modern lives. And in this sense, it is also becomes a very limiting language. And in this circle, so maybe less people would prefer using it because it's less expressive. It limits our thoughts because we cannot express maybe some sophisticated thing using Cantonese or maybe Xiao Tao or Hokkien, perhaps. So so the language stops developing itself, and gradually it becomes sort of just part of our cultural heritage instead of a living heritage. This is rather sad because, well, it is also inevitable, but also rather sad because in terms of diversity or variety of culture, we should give each language a proper chance to develop itself, because if you think each language represents a kind of thought, some methodology, it deserves new inputs to it to sort of make it vibrant, make it new. It's like just now Cantonese, because it's in our popular culture, it's actually every day we add to Cantonese because we develop new words, we develop slangs, we have things like in our tabloids, new stuff. So, but if the community is diminishing, actually it means it will gradually die. So for our next generation, it becomes only like it's not a living heritage anymore. So this is one thing I would like to say. And the second thing that just came up to me is that about English and Cantonese in Hong Kong. So I think back a few years ago. So it's like after the hangover, the people say, not even before, after there always a discourse of language standard in Hong Kong, but now it's less. It's like the public concern less about how good or bad Hong Kong people's English is. So what I expect, or maybe coming up in a few years, maybe there will be standard of Chinese in Hong Kong when the Chinese education, especially from the Chinese government, are implementing like more fiercely in Hong Kong. That means they will bring up the idea of standard of Chinese in Hong Kong that all Hong Kong people should look up to. And that's also a very harsh step in killing Cantonese, or the vibrant or the richness of Chinese language itself.
Actually, something to add maybe more also about the mother tongue, because referring to a recent TED show, and there's one of the speakers just mentioned about, I forgot the name of that mother tongue. She mentioned that that mother tongue, there's no concept of right or left, yes, front and back. Yes. And then I don't really remember how the language defines the direction, but something like that. The direction, maybe just a metaphor. Direction of your ears, yeah, direction of your eyes, yeah, mean front. Maybe direction of your ears mean left. They're different. You use other metaphor to tell about the direction. I think that different mother tongues or language embrace different imagination. Actually, you can imagine different things, or even you can imagine different things via different mother tongues. So I think that while certain mother tongues just disappear, then certain kind of imagination will also disappear.
I was imagining about the future because I think Malaysian and Singapore case is different from Hong Kong, although we were also British colonized before. Mainly due to the Chinese population are very diverse in Southeast Asia, from Malaysia and Singapore. Therefore, for us, in the larger picture of the nation, the Chinese community, among the Chinese community, there's even smaller circles, which is to belong to which region or hometown or dialect in that sense. But therefore, I think we were also easily influenced by popular culture. Like for me, example, I can understand a bit of Cantonese because I watch Hong Kong drama, and also
really can learn.
我可以講但係講得唔好。But also my Hokkien at some point was also some Penang night will say that my Hokkien sound weird, mainly because I watch Taiwan drama also. So I think for Hong Kong, especially for the influence of the culture in Hong Kong, from Hong Kong in Malaysia, especially the 70s, the movie and film and music industry influence on Southeast Asia, on Malaysia. I was wondering on the future, let's say Hong Kong's situation is now, and we mentioned about next generation. So maybe Hong Kong's popular culture become Mandarin, and it will influence or not maybe to Malaysia in a way. So I was imagining in that sense. Like before that popular culture in Penang, I mean, like when Jay Chou start rapping in Hokkien, in Taiwanese, like the 报回来了, 一级上新过来请. So it also become, and 五月天 start to also from Hokkien, from Taiwanese. So it also become when I go to KTV, I will sing that song also. So for me as a kid, oh, that's quite cool because the pop culture in Taiwan is like that. So I think for me, I was also influenced by the popular culture, especially from East Asia, in that sense.
Yeah, like,
of course, like popular culture is the vehicle of popularizing any language aside from education. There's only two ways from school or from everyday lives, meaning basically public culture. Okay? There's one thing I really want to get into because I was reading Tan Guanzhong's book. He talked about the different Chinese languages in the Sinosphere. From basically in my shows from Taiwan to Malaysia, so very different. They have different background, they have different histories, they have different ways of thinking and talking about things. But personally, I can't read Three Body Problem in Chinese. It's such a badly written Chinese book. The idea is good, the story was good, but the language itself is a very big barrier for me to read that in Chinese, although it was a Chinese novelist who wrote in Chinese. So I was thinking, how does that work in Malaysia? How does the Chinese or any literature works?
Actually, it's always has been discussion going on. Like for Malaysia, is the Mahua literature, which is Malaysian Chinese literature. We got influence. I mean, there's several writers that also went to Taiwan to further to develop there. So in Malaysia, it's even more segregated in terms of the national language is Malay, and so there's Malay literature, and but there's also discussion about what about Malay Chinese literature, and sadly Malay Tamil Indian literature is very rare to find, and yeah, actually very rare to find. And English literature, Malaysian English literature is like more popular. So also another thing about Malaysia, we don't put much effort on translation. There was a recent talk recently on. So we just formed our new government. So recently, interestingly, earlier this month, we changed our government in May, and earlier this month in July, there was 2 forums held regarding to language. One is by Dewan Bahasa dan Pusaka, which is our national literature and language department, which is Malay. So they start to discuss about Malay as a literature in the society, where English is considered more. There's hierarchy, like you guys say. So like English literature is more more popular in terms of Malay culture, Malay literature, and Chinese literature is also plays an important role in terms of the community, but it wasn't talked about in that sense. So for us, I think a lot of discussions still involved around in this sense. And another forum earlier this month is about it's called. I just saw on Facebook this morning. It's called 华语语音研讨交流会. It's by one faculty, Chinese faculty. So the title of the 研讨会 is 阴差阳错别再说错. So it means that even among the Mandarin community, we often our 语音 we don't really, we have our Malaysian 语音, Malaysian Mandarin 语音 essence, Malaysian Chinese essence. So in this forum, it's actually discussed about our which essence should we follow, which is the proper one, Taiwan or China or which one. So I think recently it was, I think the idea about Malaysia, perhaps we are still a young country, 50 or 60, from 1957 until now. So in terms that, like for the nation building is the 3rd and 4th generation. So perhaps we are still looking surrounding or didn't develop after we gained independence on this sense.
Speaking of different language in a country or society is always politics of language. It depends on it relates to the national power and how forceful or how willing the government would like to push forward its own culture. So it's like after all the years when I'm working in the literary field, promoting Hong Kong literature, I start to have like a very deep feeling about Hong Kong literature itself. Is why people don't really read about Hong Kong literature, or they read more Chinese or English or literature from the world. It's because we actually learn very little about Hong Kong literature in our education, and the government has really no strong sense of promoting Hong Kong literature. So when we talk about like maybe Malay literature or English literature, or Malay English literature or Malay Chinese literature, it's always really depends on the government, or how or like which language they want to promote as their own national emblem for their culture. So so after all, for Hong Kong literature is very daunting future, because it's like nowadays people or the Chinese government is giving out a concept of Taiwan district, yeah, which actually includes Macau, Zhejiang, and also southern part of China. So they're trying to include Hong Kong as part of a bigger district in a bigger region in southern part of China. But basically, it's a very false concept, because it has included people from different culture, with different language, and with different background and history. So I don't know how it can really make sense, but maybe after a few generations and some forceful education policy, it actually would make sense, because maybe after 2047, Hong Kong has become part of China and also part of the Taiwan region.
They learn language itself, and they actually learn language that you still need to learn somehow. I mean, culture. Actually, there's not only about the mother tongue. It's also about the whole thing. So I guess the people who really live here or speak the Cantonese really need to do something. Maybe try to make some written Cantonese. I don't know. It's actually more and more people try to take out what our spoken Cantonese can be written actually somehow.
Cantonese is the only form of Chinese dialect that can be written completely, like Hokkien or even Hakka cannot be written completely. Not even a third of it can be written out. Talk about Sichuan is all the same. So we're kind of better place than other people.
Yeah, I think if it can be written, I think it's somehow more different situation. But it's hard to be generally used in the society, I guess. Yeah, I don't know. But at least, yeah, as your own, you speak it, you do something. Yeah, your art, your face on that. It's still better than nothing, I guess.
I think it's still more about the Cantonese education. I think there's only English and Chinese education concept in Hong Kong people. There's no Cantonese education.
Yeah.
But actually, we need to teach people to speak Cantonese, even like for foreigners. But for all the years, because we are actually very welcoming and accommodating, and when English-speaking people or people from around the world they come, we speak English. But then I think we really should promote more about like Cantonese education and teach foreign people, like people from other parts of the world, to really speak Cantonese. And that's the way to enlarge the speaking community in Hong Kong. And also how to write and read in Cantonese, I think that's also very important. So even though we cannot control the government education policy, we can still like promote and teach Cantonese. Maybe more formally, is it like a course or something as a language?
There's always some saying that Cantonese cannot be properly written. It's a very good writing, something like that. It's more using mostly the structure of Mandarin.
No, actually the newspaper they talked about in 60s, 70s, actually they were like the whole newspaper is written in Cantonese.
Yeah.
It's pretty good.
Yeah, I mean,
it's hard to read, but it's pretty good, I have to say.
I mean, yeah, just through the education, the teachers always just force you to use the structure of Mandarin.
Yeah. We have,
white.
But it's called. Anyway, so written language is different from the spoken language. It's a specialty of all Chinese languages. Even in Mandarin speaking, they have a very different way of colloquial language compared to a written language is very different. Anyway.
I think for my case is use it, of course. I mean, for my case is I use it with my family generation, but also was discussing with friends that is working on speaking Hokkien campaign. Is to actually produce more work. I mean, for art or culture people, it's actually to produce more work talking about it. Although for Penang Speak Hokkien campaign, they are pushing to have Hokkien class in the school, which I think is a good movement, but they are still working on that one. I think being in the art and culture scene is slightly flexible. That as an artist role, perhaps is to, for me, it's a route for me to look back on my thinking. I mean, it's a route that that guides me to look for the relation of it. So as an artist, I think, yeah, to talk more about this language thing for myself, I think.
Thank you. Do anyone have any questions? Okay, good.
Language is such an important thing because without the language, you can't really express those feelings. And so the mother tongue is so important because there are words you can use, but some feelings, unless you've spoken it or experienced it, you don't know. So, for example, you were mentioning about Norway. I think in Iceland they've got 70 or so words for snow. Is that one word? And you use that one word. So maybe sleep or but feel more, but not so much. So it is very important to preserve those languages. And I think nowadays people don't read it as much. Movies, you're right. Movies are a good way to preserve it and art. But you're a writer and poet. It is so difficult because there are hardly any bookstores left in Hong Kong. Very few bookstores. Hardly anybody buys books. There's not much readership, which is such a sad thing because all artistic ideas and good, great ideas are all in written form for it to survive. And now we're coming to an age where we spend 40, with Twitter and all that, it is shorter and shorter and all just emojis. To express ourselves. So it is so important for us to protect languages because some things can be expressed only in those languages.
That's what the whole thing is. The whole show is about. There's a concept called language relativity. So it's about how different languages think very differently, and how connectivity different, like wired to bring differently, basically. What I think the Chinese government is trying to do is kind of mimic how the language that is in China or even in other Chinese-speaking communities too. Like because of the powerful Chinese, they would ask the Malaysian would have to go like revert into one single language, Mandarin speaking. Like, except that like the Cantonese and even Hokkien, even Suzhou is very different languages by itself, by its own right. The way of expressing something is very different. The metaphors are different. Many phrases are very different. Like these kind of things is kind of enriching in literature and also our thinking too. So that's the whole thing of the whole idea of why I do this show is because of this, because of showing the diversity of it and showing how different language think differently. So we have to preserve and safeguard this kind of rights to be free to speak in different languages.
And this large ethnic minority group in Hong Kong as well. And like you said, Cantonese are very welcoming. So anytime you very comfortable here and manage with English. And you try and learn the Cantonese, but I think it's probably there's place for it to make, like you suggested, make a greater effort to teach the ethnic minority people, like myself, Cantonese. Because I think in schools they learn Mandarin, they taught Mandarin, but that level never exceeds primary two, even after you study for 30 years. The level of Chinese is only primary two or primary two, so it's not really very useful. What would be really useful is to be able to speak to people in Hong Kong, live here, to be able to really speak it and express ourselves and understand the real true feelings that people in Hong Kong, like all of us, feel.
I agree. Actually, the case can be compared to like in Japan, because actually Japan they preserve their own language very well because they like that the English is not good enough, and that's why somehow when people they try to live in Japan, they find the Japanese quite off-putting. It's like because sometimes they will show that the Japanese are very good, and those who learn Japanese, the standard are not so good, something like that. So, but then in this sense, they preserve Japanese very well. So, but for the case like in Hong Kong, I think at least we can let the foreigners know the special feature in Cantonese. Well, of course, I know it's difficult to learn a language, especially it's not worldwide. It's like there are actually more foreigners learning Chinese and Mandarin, but because for business purpose and they can travel to China and all that. But for Cantonese, I know it's not that popular, useful, but still we can teach about like the Cantonese culture or special feature about Cantonese. At least they know the interesting thing in Cantonese. That's I think very important.
The Cantonese Opera, there's only one Cantonese Opera company left.
There are a few, but
like
there's
quite
one major one.
Yeah. They have a guild, like they have guild of Cantonese speaking. There's quite a few of them. Yeah, but very limited though. Like the literature is very limited. They do have new drama coming out every year, every month.
Yeah, Cantonese drama, quite opera, quite a lot.
But it's quite But it's very very distant from most of the people even in Hong Kong. Like I don't think we have seen. When was the last time we seen?
But actually, this is the most popular art form in Hong Kong.
Yes.
Cantonese opera.
Yes.
Can I ask about the Cantonese opera?
Yeah.
Is about what reference they do? Is it back then or now?
Back then. Mostly back then.
Is there a contemporary
Maybe
Cantonese
90%.
opera?
There probably is. But,
Because in Malaysia, for the Hokkien Putaisi glove puppet, we have in Penang 5 troops and
five troops, and also because the temples actually are the main one that
the
patrons for that. Cantonese opera also, but it's always about back then, like it's Tang Kwok-hin or CUC. So I was wondering about Hong Kong case.
There's probably one or two each year that is contemporary and modern, but other than that, the 99% of it.
I think when
I was discussing with my friend and working on preserving dialect campaign. We did mention that because Cantonese or Hokkien, even in the Budaisi or opera, is always about back then, so it's not so much contemporized. So
Even the Taiwanese is the same, right? The pili is always about the kung fu. The pili is the Budaisi, like the soft puppets, not soft puppets, but the puppets theater in Taiwan is that big. each of them, and it's sci-fi / kung fu and all in that. So it's really fun. But you're right. Like when Kim Woo-jin, the Korean artist who did the survey on the Taiwanese situation, when she comes to Hong Kong, she is coming to Hong Kong again and want to record some youngster talking in Cantonese and get us thinking. It's like, oh, we actually don't have much more Cantonese folk songs that we are. I can able to sing like 5 or so, and that's it. Like we don't have a very strong folk music repertoire that we can on to. Yeah, that is.
Not recording it now.
Yes. So yeah, I guess that's it for today. Thank you for coming. So we're going to do something like we can casually talk after. Thank you very much.